Welcome to Mountain Bike Express. This week we look at the sports speed merchants with the start of the 7-Up BMBF National Downhill Series. We're again at Newnham Park on the edge of Dartmoor for the racing, but first let's find out more about the mountain bike maniacs. Downhill racing is often viewed as the point where the head lets go and the heart takes over. Which is not surprising, since riders travel at speeds in excess of 50 miles an hour, with only millimetres thickness of brake cable between them and potential disaster. But it's the rider's skill, as well as the possible crashes, that draws the riders in crowds to such a degree that it has remained a separate discipline at the World Championships. At the first World Championships on a fast course in Durango, it was one of the sport's most flamboyant characters and local rider, Greg Herbold, who took the rainbow jersey in the men's event. And in the women's, it was the pre-race favourite, Canadian Cindy Devine, who took gold. While in the junior men's, Britain's Dave Hemming rode away with silver behind the American Joey Irwin. In Italy, in '91, John Tomac looked as if he was going to take gold in the downhill as well as the cross-country, with an early run that the rest of the field couldn't get close to until almost the final run. A little-known Swiss rider, Albert Eaton, took nearly 5 seconds off Tomac's time, and with it, the gold. In the women's event, it was the Italian ski instructor and the crowd's favourite, Giovanna Bonazzi, who was in a different league from the rest of the field, finishing nearly 15 seconds ahead of second-place rider Natalie Fiat. Deb Murrell scored Britain's best downhill result with 10th. Canada in '92 saw the Americans return to the top, with the former kamikaze downhill winner Jimmy Deaton taking silver, as he returned to racing after a serious crash in '91. And it was another American, Dave Cullinan, who took gold. Cully is an ex-BMXer who excels on technical courses and at 185 pounds prefers going down to up. Meanwhile, there was disappointment for the Brits when Jason McCroy, who had qualified in 8th place, crashed and punctured in the main event. In the women's event, American Kim Saunier, a doctor of mathematics, showed that downhilling isn't for the empty-headed, as she took calculated risks on the way to silver, behind her teammate and former cross-country world champion, Julie Furtado. Julie was on a flyer, having had to retire from the cross-country event the day before. But surely, even the best riders worry about potential crashes.
Yeah, you tend to get the guys that sort of talk about crashing and stuff like that, and it goes through your head when you're going up to the start line, you know, well, what happens if I crash? And you've got to try and wipe it out, otherwise it does sort of psych you out a little bit.
I make many crashes. I have some accidents, but okay, it's a sport, and I think when you make downhill race at the top level, it's sure one time you have a big crash. It's with downhill.
Nein, sicher, es macht Spaß, vor allem auch im Training macht es Spaß. Okay, das Rennen, da muss man natürlich voll ans Limit gehen und muss sich voll konzentrieren. Dann ist dann wie eine Arbeit, die Freude kommt vielleicht dann eher später, vor allem dann beim Rennen.
That's why you do it, really. It's good when you scare yourself but you ride through it and you come out the other side. And I'm really scared when I'm sitting at the top if it's an important downhill.
Well, however convinced the riders may be, accidents do happen, and it was the least the manufacturers could do to offer some additional protection, as it soon became clear that a helmet alone wasn't enough. At first, the safety gear was definitely not macho, or if you did wear it, you were expected to ride like a madman. But as the top riders began to don body armour, its credibility took off, and it's now a must for any serious downhiller who has a brain and wants to keep it. Though body armour won't stop the crashes, it will reduce their impact. End result? The riders go even faster, of course. Something else that has helped the riders get down in one piece is suspension. The onset of the bouncy bits began in earnest in '88 with the flex stem. This simple system proved very popular with riders on bumpy descents, and in 1990 Off-Road also produced a rear suspension bike with the same technology. By now the floodgates were opened and suspension add-ons were more sought after than Michael Jackson. To start with, the designs were similar to motorbikes, but they quickly evolved to be more suited for mountain biking. Now, most bike manufacturers are producing full suspension models, and there are some weird and wonderful looking bikes out there. Which means in less than 20 years, we're back to where we started, with downhill-only bikes. So, the first downhill of the 7-Up BMBF series weaves its way off Dartmoor, dropping nearly 200 metres in just over 2 kilometres. There's a flat section in the middle that will require a sprint from the riders before they head down through a speed-controlling chicane and the river at the finish. In the men's event, Kona's Chris Horsfield was the first rider to complete the course in under 5 minutes 50 seconds with a very smooth and controlled ride. But he only held the top spot for a few minutes, with pace rider Richard Thackeray knocking a further 2 seconds off Chris's time. Richard is more renowned as a cross-country rider, and his strength will have certainly helped him over the flat section, as he was slower than Chris coming off Dartmoor. But through the final chicane, he proved he wasn't afraid to try a difficult line and had the skills to handle it. Richard's time looked secure until the final few riders. Getting close was the 1992 Junior 7-Up BMBF National Champion Simon Kipling, riding for GT. Kippers was within the leader's time on the moor, but tired through the pedalling section, and despite a clean run through the chicane, he dropped back to second. Next off was the Hardesty Nike rider, Jason McCroy. Jason has looked very promising for a couple of seasons, but has often had luck against him on the important rides. But after a winter of improving his overall fitness, he looked as if he was getting it right here. He powered on the flat section and was economic through the technical sections, coming in an incredible 20 seconds faster than Richard Thackeray.
Now really pumping hard with those legs, drops it down a gear and flies down there past the finish line, bang, takes in a big breath of air.
Dave Hemming would have been unaware of Jason's time when he set off, but was primarily after a steady ride in his first downhill race since breaking his collarbone at the '92 World Championships. As always, he looked good on the technical sections, but his layoff had obviously affected his fitness, and in the end, he could only beat Simon Kipling's time and move up into third. The final seeded rider off was the defending 7-Up BMBF National Champion, Jason Shackleton. Jason was hardly beaten in Britain last year, but with a full suspension downhill bike on this course, he was suffering through the pedalling sections, as the suspension absorbs a lot of the rider's effort, and in the end he could only place 15th.
Took it quite steady on the top section. I didn't think much time would be made up along there. Kept it smooth as opposed to fast, and seemed to make a lot of time up, I think. On the flattish sections, spun a smallish gear and did well.
He certainly did, with a time that was over 20 seconds faster than Richard's, when the remaining places were being decided by tenths of a second. In the women's event, it was the national champion Sian Roberts riding for pace who was first off. Sian was a relatively surprising national champion, as she is more established in cross-country, but with the training ground of Snowdonia on her doorstep, she has always been an excellent bike handler. Though still suffering from an ankle injury she picked up before the first cross-country of the season, her time of 6 minutes 52 seconds would obviously be one to beat.
Always very happy. There is a big smile as she goes across the line as well.
Next off was Formula One's Deb Morrell, who was out to regain the top spot from Sian, having been runner-up to her in last year's Nationals. Deb is probably the best bike handler in the country, which has often been to her advantage on technical cross-country courses, as well as in the downhill. So she will have been furious with this mistake that could have cost her the lead, after having put in an impressive display powering her way off the moor. Deb had unshipped her chain, but in the end limped home 8 seconds faster than Sian, though with only just enough momentum to cross the line.
Whoa, and Deb just gets across the line in time using the all momentum. Well, I suspect that...
Following her down was a rider capable of capitalising from Deb's mistake. Karen van Meerbeek put in some good rides in '92 and gained experience at the World Championships. And now riding for Proflex, she has all the essential team backup. Coming into the chicane, she was only a few seconds behind Deb, and had she not also fouled it up, she may well have been able to gain enough time to take the first round of the 7-Up BMBF series, but in the end had to be content with second behind a relieved Deb.
The riders coming down, here comes Karen van Meerbroek. Fantastic ride from Karen.
Deb's winning margin was only 1.5 seconds, so there should be close competition between the top three as the 4-race series progresses.
We'll take a break now then.
By now, you'll have guessed that downhilling isn't as easy as it looks. So for expert advice on the quickest way down, here's another of our top descenders, Nick Craig.
Getting downhill fast is not just about letting go of the brakes. In fact, they're more use than the most trick suspension. What is essential is that you are in control, not the track. Don't grab the bars too tightly. You have to guide your bike, not fight it, and have a couple of fingers covering the brakes. You're bound to need them. Keep the chain on the big ring so that it doesn't bounce off. Keep your weight on the pedals and your bum off the saddle. This way, you can easily move your centre of gravity. You don't get thrown around by the bumps, and it's a lot more comfortable. As always, keep an eye on the track ahead to pick the best line. And if there is an obstacle ahead, concentrate on the route you want to take, not the obstacle, or you'll be sure to hit it.
There is also a Downhill World Cup, and the first round got underway in the sunshine and 85-degree temperature of Monaco on an extremely rocky and technical course that descended 400 metres off the cliff tops overlooking the Mediterranean in a distance of 3 kilometres. In the women's event, the reigning junior cross-country world champion, Swiss rider Rita Bergi, turned heads as she set the mark with a time of 7 minutes 51 seconds. The 19-year-old's time was comfortably beaten by the German rider Regina Stiefel, who had 11 seconds in hand. But that was nothing compared to the former world champion Giovanna Bonazzi. Bonazzi relished the course, which demanded upper body strength as well as skill in handling the tight hairpin bends. She eventually finished 36 seconds ahead of Stiefel in a time of 7 minutes and 4 seconds. With world champion Julie Furtado not competing in the downhill series and Missy Jovi under suspension from her governing body, the American's honour was left in the hands of Kim Saunier. Appearing somewhat nervous on her first trip outside the States, she was unable to better Bergi's time and was disappointed with fourth. It was the first time she had failed to make the top three in any major downhill competition she'd entered. In the men's event, it was another junior world champion, French downhiller Nicolas Vouilloz, who set the mark. Vouilloz lives only 20 kilometres from the course and had practised it endlessly in the weeks coming up to the race, so, not surprisingly, looked comfortable with all the hairpin bends. In both his runs, he posted the fastest time, gliding effortlessly over the rocky sections that had a number of riders off and running, or just off and punctured. Vouilloz, who's just 17, eventually won in a time of 6 minutes and 10 seconds. Second place went to the German rider Jürgen Benneker, who on a much improved second run leapfrogged a dozen riders to place himself on the podium. Round 2 moved north to Lillehammer in Norway, and though the sun was still shining, the temperature was down by about 20 degrees. It wasn't just the temperature that was different, with a much faster and technically less demanding course, which was likely to suit a different type of rider. There had been rain earlier in the week and the course was drying out, so it was always going to be the second run that decided positions. And in the women's, the early target was set by the French rider Sophie Kempf with a time of 6 minutes 42 seconds. Britain's Deb Murrell had placed 6th on the first run and was looking to better it before she lost time by coming out of her cleats on a fast rocky section, and despite holding second for a while, had to settle for 8th. Switzerland's Brigitte Kasper, who was 5th in Monaco and beginning to make her mark on the downhill scene, was next to take pole position. But that was bound to be short-lived, with Giovanna Benazzi, the next rider, off. Wearing the series leader's white jersey and with local accessories adorning her helmet, she was the fastest through the top half of the course, which was more technically demanding than the bottom flatter section, which required spinning out in the big gears. She comfortably took the lead in a time of 6 minutes 31, but then she had to watch and wait, as last off was Regina Stiefel, who had posted the fastest first round time. Stiefel's superior fitness enabled her to make time on the flatter sections, eventually winning in a time of 6 minutes and 16 seconds. Did this result signal to downhilling for Regina?
No. I hope I come in 2 weeks. I go to Canada and I hope more for the cross country. It's my discipline. Downhill it's for me, it's fun for me.
Again, as in the women's event, the American riders were missing because of a clash with one of their national racers. So the Europeans were viewing Lillehammer as an opportunity to notch up extra points before crossing the pond for rounds 3 and 4. German rider Jürgen Sprich, who was 15th in Monaco and 10th at the 92 Worlds, took an early lead with a time of 5 minutes 45 seconds that was to remain unbeaten for 8 minutes. That was until round 1's third placing, Stefano Migliorini, came down 2 seconds faster. Next off and moving into the lead was the 1991 world champion Albert Eaton, who, though down on the first half, powered through the flatter sections to finish in a time of 5 minutes 42. But this was again almost immediately beaten by the local Norwegian rider Morten Hjemmetgaard, who, though not a regular on the international scene, showed, as did the French in round 1, the benefits of home advantage, coming through in a time of 5 minutes and 41 seconds. And it was yet another Norwegian, Rune Højdahl, who was 7th in Monaco, who was next to take the top spot, before Morten could even contemplate celebrating. Højdahl's time of 5 minutes 35 seconds was 12 seconds faster than the fastest first run, which belonged to Jürgen Benneker. Benneker took air wherever possible and was very smooth through the technical sections, but must have given time to Højdahl, who's also an accomplished cross-country rider, on the pedalling sections, as he finished in a time of 5 minutes 38 seconds, which could only move him up into second. But Højdahl wasn't going to celebrate yet, as he knew Jason McCroy was still due down. McCroy had punctured on the first run, having posted the fastest split time, but he had to pass slower riders who had set off only 30 seconds ahead of him on the final run. In the end, he finished 20th with a time of 6 minutes dead. Benneker's second place was enough to see him move into first place in the series overall, ahead of Højdahl, since the round 1 winner had failed to finish in the top 20. In the women's, the leader's jersey was shared by Benazzi and Stiefel, who next head over to America, where the competition heats up. Next week, we're staying at high speed, but this time with cross-country, as the third round of the 7-Up BMBF National Series moves to Aldershot and the fastest course of the year.
that's it for this week, but we'll be back again next week with that mountain biking cross country, plus more from the ultimate unwind.
Compete for the honour of being a dream.